going to see two numbers of billion-dollar companies pretty soon. In my little group chat with my CEO friends, there's this betting pool for the first year that there's a one-person billion-dollar company.
This has the potential to make life much better. I think it's honestly a layup.
AI is the most profound technology humanity is working on, more profound than fire or electricity.
Hi, I'm Reid.
And I'm Daniel.
And welcome to Nordic Notes. As you just saw, there is a lot of buzz and excitement in the technology industry around the potential to build very large and valuable companies with far fewer people than were required in the past. And this is all thanks to the emergence of very usable and available AI models.
And today we will dive into the evidence behind how companies can do more with less. And we'll look into whether AI is too expensive today. And we'll dive into the detailed data of what automation and the state of AI actually is at the moment.
So to kick that off, we wanted to start by talking a little bit about some of the costs involved in AI and how that's changed.
And looking at this graph behind us, which I think is a very good representation done by Andrei Retterat at the Data Driven VC, a newsletter that we follow, both of us, which I can deeply recommend, is sort of the marginal cost of distribution have gone down with the internet, and then we had the cloud, which sort of the marginal cost of storage went down. And now we have seen the development in AI where the actual marginal cost of generation has gone down with the different generations of GPT over time. And now we're at GPT-4, and obviously we will see more development from all of the foundation model vendors over time. And that enables more automation in AI. And
of course, we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but fundamentally what we're discussing here is if you think about a task within a company, what is the most cost-effective way to accomplish that task? Is it to use a person to go out and do it themselves, or is it to use an AI or automated system instead? And as you can see here, for a very long time, it has been quite expensive to experiment with using automation. Obviously, the core idea now is that it is much more affordable and perhaps even dipping below the cost of employing a human to do that same role. And here we can see how this is actually impacting S&P 500 companies, so very large enterprises, and it's over a very long period of time. So we're going back 30 years here, and you can see or more than 30 years, and you can see how the number of workers needed to generate $1 million in revenue has massively decreased in that time. So now we're looking at almost 2 people or below 2 people per $1 million of revenue, which is an incredible statistic when you consider that just back in the 90s, it was sort of between 5 and 6 people required to accomplish the same thing. And obviously, not all of this is down to AI, but what we're expecting, of course, with the advent of affordable, usable, and available AI models is that this goes even further. And does this go down to sort of 0.5 or even, just above 0 human workers needed to generate $1 million in revenue? And that, of course, is what you would need to build a $100 million revenue business or sort of a $1 billion company with just one person.
I think as technology develops in an exponential pace, this will for sure continue to go down. And we also thought in relation to this, interesting to look at what has actually happened on the tech side, where companies are obviously a bit forward-leaning and using AI and automation to a large extent, also using software to do a lot of tasks and automate tasks. And we looked at this lovely website, layoffs.fyi, which tracks the layoffs in tech companies. You can see here in this graph, there has been loads of layoffs since COVID-19. During 2022 and 2023, hundreds of thousands of people were laid off from these technology companies. And I think a question worth asking here is how many of these will actually be hired back to these companies?
Yeah, and effectively, what we're asking is, are these layoffs caused by AI or by new automation systems that have emerged in the last couple of years? Of course, we talk about that all the time. Or, of course, there are other factors, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, you had war in Europe, you had, obviously the pandemic, lots of other macroeconomic shockwaves that have potentially driven this. So really, to your point, how many of these people get hired back
Yeah.
versus how many of these tasks that these people were once doing are now doable by systems that are far less expensive and also, work 24/7 and don't complain and don't ask for bonuses or
absolutely.
healthcare, right?
No, exactly. And I think what the dynamic here is a bit that we've seen I think as you're on it with, the macro has been difficult, which means that many companies focus on profitability. They do lay off a lot of people. That's what we see. I think in the US, many companies have overhired. But at the same time, we had the breakthrough of generative AI.
Yeah.
And the next generation, sort of the next curve up again, that technology is there to be used. We know that companies are looking to use it. So then I think the question whether these will be hired back becomes super relevant. Yeah. I mean, in the end, now the technology is there. Why hire everyone back?
Yeah, exactly. And of course, another very important point in all of this is higher interest rates, making it very difficult for some large companies to maneuver. In terms of hiring, payroll is the number one biggest cost driver for almost every company on the Fortune 500. So it is definitely a big question now that there are tools that make it easier for them to accomplish the same thing at a far lower cost. And continuing on the same point here.
So we've looked into a couple of studies. This is one conducted by a team at MIT and Stanford who've looked into the fairly popular space of customer support when it comes to automation. So emails and voice and so on, which is generally where generative AI does a pretty good job at automating things. So being able to capture messages and suggests answers, those kind of things. And this graph behind us now is showing some of the results, which are quite interesting. And I think it's a very important point when it comes to this automation of workers is that workers who have been doing their job for a very long time are really proficient, right? They do a really good job. They are actually really fast as well. So they are quite productive. Whereas a lot of the workforce is also new and so-called sort of low-skilled people who are learning the job, they are getting the experience. And this graph behind us is a result from the study, which was done on 5,200 customer support agents, where they run their work with and without augmentation using AI. And basically this graph shows the similarities between low-skilled workers and high-skilled workers. So generally, if you look to the left here, we have before AI, you'll see that the similarity is, something like 0.55. If you look at a text message sent by a skilled worker, it's not very similar to a low-skilled worker. It's sort of half of the text is roughly similar. And then as they augment these people with AI, training it on their own data, you can see on the red dots to the right where they start using AI, you can see how the similarity of the high-skilled and low-skilled workers goes up a lot. So actually you can then hire a low-skilled worker and it does pretty much this very similar job as the high-skilled worker. They cost less and so on, and it scales really well in that sense. So it's quite an interesting study.
Yeah. No, super interesting. And I think also to some extent it validates a lot of the concerns that people who've had a given job for 20, 30 years have now about these technologies, of course, because it basically takes a lot of the work that they and people in their cohort have done over the last 2-3 decades, puts it into an AI model and allows all of these sort of young up-and-coming competitors effectively for their job to do their job just as well as they do. So it is, you can sort of understand the anxiety that a lot of these more experienced, more senior, older, what they would consider in this study, high-skill workers feel about these systems.
Absolutely. And if we move on to the next one, you can also see that they have improved productivity in terms of the resolutions they do per hour. Obviously, again, this is customer support. So you can look at the purple graph to the right here, where you can see that they are doing more resolutions per hour than before, and the Never AI is furthest to the left, which means they do far less resolutions. And it seems small here, the difference, but it's actually quite big. It's between almost like 1 and 3. So they are certainly heavily augmented by AI. Moving on to the next, you can also see the actual handle time goes down by quite a bit. This is an input, a metric to this, of course, and a key driver for customers support, of course, that they can manage things fast. So I think it's a very interesting study, and it concludes that this space, and I think similar spaces, which are very much text-based, this is proven to have a big impact. And step one is to augment people and make the low-skilled ones more skilled. And the next step is obviously complete automation. I added this as well, which is the GitHub study, which is a fairly famous one. It basically shows the same thing, where the blue ones are the ones using AI, and this is the handling time again on the x-axis, where you can see that the time to complete the task is way lower among the blue ones. It definitely shows the same thing. I believe they looked as well at the impact for developers. Again, GitHub is obviously for coders, and they found and there's a fairly interesting economic upside here, which is about the workers working in software developments represent about 2% of the US GDP. If you extrapolate it and you make them sort of 55 to 60% more productive, it has actually a fairly significant impact on the GDP of a country like the US.
Of course. I mean, you can, if you're more productive, you produce more revenue for a business, and you can see that in the economic figures. Absolutely. And of course, when these systems are implemented in very large companies with thousands or even tens or hundreds of thousands of employees, then you can very clearly see it moves the needle in GDP figures, both on a national level and also within cities and within tech ecosystems.
Absolutely.
So we're starting to see some of that data now coming out the other side, which is super interesting.
I believe you looked into some of this data as well.
Yeah, but actually the data that I looked into, the study that I saw, was more trying to almost dispel some of this narrative. And so here, a study that I found also from MIT, very smart cookies over there at MIT, Maya Svanberg, who's actually Swedish, so from here in Stockholm, but did this study with her colleagues at MIT. And what they were really focusing on was trying to determine, and they were looking more at computer vision. They did talk about generative AI models as well, so I'll come to that. But initially the study was, using computer vision and best-in-class AI models, how expensive is it really to automate some of these tasks that we're talking about? And they found actually that there is a human advantage when the scale of the deployment is still fairly limited. And what that means, at least in their findings, is that fairly small businesses or medium-sized companies using these rather expensive computer vision models would not be able to get the same kind of economic upside as a very large company deploying this across their entire infrastructure to tens of or hundreds of thousands of employees. And to some extent that is somewhat obvious, but then they've done some really interesting work to figure out what the specific numbers are, and they found that only 23% of workers, measured in terms of dollar wages, could be effectively supplanted by AI. And of course, again, just to be very clear, they're talking about computer vision, but they do also mention in the study that the existence of generative AI models in no way undermines this research. They think that the underlying economic model of predicting the cost of computer vision in this research can basically be applied to foundation models as well, in the context of fine-tuning foundation models, how much data you need and how expensive it is to get the best out of these generative models. So they're trying to sort of say here at the end of the study, yes, we didn't really look at LLMs per se, but actually if you look at LLMs, they are still very expensive to fine-tune for your specific use cases. And so smaller businesses with, smaller deployments are not going to get the same kind of value as larger businesses who can do this at a much wider scale. And in sort of real terms, what they're saying here is that, yes, obviously, generative models which are focusing on text rather than images can look at a lot more data. There is a lot more text out there than there are images to train your models on. And of course, text-based models have a lot larger sort of context that they can look at, right? I mean, again, text is sort of more applicable in other contexts, whereas images are very specific. So they were sort of qualifying this by saying maybe you can have these text-based generative models that are a little bit less expensive, but still the overall point is that the curve will look quite similar. Maybe the dotted line there showing where the advantage shifts is moved a little bit further to the left with generative text-based models, but still there is going to be a fairly wide swath of this graph in front of us where humans do still have the advantage simply because of the cost of deploying it at a fairly large scale. And staying on the same study here, you can see the percentage of jobs that have computer vision exposure. So we're looking at images and being able to do image recognition is very important. Huge delta between that and the number of jobs that have at least one attractive computer vision, AI-driven computer vision task.
Yeah.
So that's sort of
from an economic
economic viability perspective.
I mean, because what we talked about before is the generative AI side of this, and which is obviously one side. It's just one type of model, and then we have to actually automate a lot of tasks in society and in companies. You also need the computer vision part, and it seems like, given these studies, and I guess both of them, the cost of AI is declining. It has declined with the different models that have come out lately, but we're still on that path where for some companies it doesn't make sense to automate some things. I guess we will see that being offset somehow by the new companies that evolve and new SaaS services that does a simple task really well. And maybe if they do that across a lot of small companies, they can sell that to a decent price. Especially NVIDIA launching their new platform called Blackwell platform, or the B100 platform, or B200 platform, where they claim that they can run real-time generative AI with 25 times less cost and energy consumption.
And I think that's generally the point we've been trying to make here, is that there is this tension between the speed of innovation, the cost curve coming down very, very aggressively, and then on the other side, the question marks remaining over, specific work tasks, specific job functions, and specific businesses, specific scales of companies in different industries, and how they look at this cost equation. At what point for each individual task, for each individual employee, and for each individual business does the cost of using an AI tool, become almost sort of, you can't say no to it, right? It's sort of so tempting because you can see how that will affect your P&L and make your business much more money in the long run. And I think maybe to conclude this episode, we started off by talking about the billion-dollar one-person startup. And I think that it probably is more likely that this type of future is more applicable for companies that are being built today than for the ones that already have 100,000 employees and they have to start making big cuts and very sort of difficult decisions around these people and their jobs and how their business functions. Whereas for somebody who's starting from scratch, has a totally new idea, wants to build something new, and you have the option of going out and hiring somebody for, $100,000, $200,000 a year, or you can use a tool that costs you a tenth of that and achieves the same thing. Now, if you have thoughts on this, and of course there is a huge political context behind this that we've intentionally not touched on today, please leave your comments below. Either LinkedIn or YouTube will do, and we'll comment back to you. Absolutely. Make sure that you like the video and subscribe for future episodes. Thanks for watching.